webinar, and
Oh, sorry.
so tonight we're talking
Sorry.
about the voice of the child, and it's a Stronger Practice Hub webinar with myself, Kim Barnetson, and also Damon is going to be our IT person this evening. Here's our agenda for the evening. What do we mean by the voice of the child? Why is it important? We're going to have a look at things like the EYFS, UNCRC. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, I'll explain. Birth to 5 matters, that type of thing. And then we're also going to look at a couple of theories and see how they tie in with understanding the voice of the child. And then we're going to have a look at what the hearing or enabling the voice of the child looks like in practice. And that's when we're going to use Slido as well, so that you can come in and add your best practice ideas. I would say, please don't worry about if you've got a question, just interrupt me. I can't see you when I'm presenting, so just unmute yourself and shout out, or pop something in the chat and Damon will let me know if I've missed anything. But I welcome feedback. So, why is the voice of the child important? You might already have seen this lovely poem before. This is only one part of the poem, but it's called the 100 Voices, and it's by Loris Malaguzzi, who's the sort of founder of the Reggio Emilia approach. You might have remember that we covered a little bit of this when we were talking about enabling agency in children, and actually enabling agency and enabling or hearing the voice of the child is very similar. So when we're talking about the voice of the child, it's not just hearing questions and verbal communication from the children, it's noticing, interpreting and responding to children's communication in whatever form that takes. So this poem is particularly relevant. A child is made of 100. The child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 thoughts, 100 ways of thinking, of playing, of speaking, 100 ways of listening, of marveling, of loving, 100 joys for singing and understanding, 100 worlds to discover, 100 worlds to invent, 100 worlds to dream. The child has 100 languages. What that's saying in much better terms than I could put it is that children communicate in all sorts of ways. So even though we think of the voice of the child as maybe being verbal communication, what we're also thinking of is non-verbal communication, their emotions, their expressions, their interests, the things that scare them, the things that give them joy, how we hear that and enable it in our settings is what we're going to be covering this evening. Now, the UNCRC, for anyone who's not familiar with that, it's the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is the children's equivalent of the Human Rights Act, and it covers or underpins everything really that we have to do with children legally in the UK and in most of the world. Pretty much the whole world has ratified the UNCRC. And it's made of lots of different articles. And one of the articles, Article 12, is that the child has a right to be heard and taken seriously. They have a right to have their own view right from the very start. So hearing the voice of the child supports well-being, belonging, and self-esteem. We all want to be heard. We all want to be recognised, don't we? Recognising the voice of the child strengthens learning, and planning starts from the children's interests and motivations. We know that from the EYFS, don't we? It always says that we must plan from our knowledge of the child. And our knowledge of the child comes from the voice of the child. Understanding the voice of the child also supports safeguarding, because children communicate, as we know, through all different ways. Behaviour, for example, play, body language can tell us a lot about what's going on with that child. So that's why the voice of the child is so important in early years in particular, but right throughout childhood. So as we said, this is the UNCRC, Article 12, respect for the views of the child. Every child has the right to express their views, their feelings and wishes in all matters affecting them, and to have their views considered and taken seriously. This right applies at all times or the child's day-to-day home life. We're not really involved in some of those bigger things, are we? We are involved in things like transition into different settings. And quite often, those big decisions are made without children's consideration, asking their views. We can help to support children, and what we can do is help to enable their voice in smaller things, which is just as valuable. If we think about the EYFS, everywhere throughout the EYFS, it stresses the importance of understanding the child's individual interests and needs. And children who learn and develop well with support from adults who respond to their individual interests and needs is what it says. And we also obviously have the key person approach. So if you're a childminder, you might just be working one adult with the children, in which case you're the key person. And if you're in a bigger setting, each child should be allocated their own key person. Some settings where they're able to let the children choose their own key person because they might bond with a particular key person. And that's quite a good example of recognizing the voice of the child right from the beginning. So the key person approach promotes children's learning by developing a deep understanding of the individual needs. If you were to open up the EYFS as a Word document and use the search function, you would find that individual is one of the main words that comes up the most in the EYFS, and that's because there is a really strong focus on the individual child and supporting the child as an individual rather than as a cohort of 3-year-olds or a cohort of 4-year-olds, for example. And then if we think about the non-statutory documents such as Birth to 5 Matters, here it says listening to children's voices and recognising these are expressed in a range of ways, including non-verbally, is central to inclusive practice. Children's rights to be heard and have their views taken seriously was established via Article 12 of the UNCRC and is embedded in the statutory provisions in England of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Code of Practice. So as well as being in the EYFS, it's also in the SEND Code of Practice. And through the Code of Practice, local authorities are mandated to ensure that children's and families' views are sought and contribute to educational decision making. I don't know how much of that really happens in reality because, of course, there aren't always a lot of options, are there? But we should be taking children's views into account in anything like this. And these are the principles of the EYFS down here, aren't they? The unique child, positive relationships, enabling environments equals learning and development. Now, I really like this. For me, this is like a recipe for supporting children. You add a unique child, a positive relationship, and an enabling environment, and the result is a learning and development. And of course, if we're thinking about the voice of the child, that's the unique child, and it's the positive relationship because you have to be in a positive relationship with that child to hear their voice. And when you've heard their voice, you're creating an enabling environment. So the voice of the child is really, really crucial to understanding and supporting the child's development. So we've got a couple of theories to have a look at. Reggio Emilia is a really obvious one because we saw that poem at the beginning, didn't we? The 100 Voices. In a Reggio Emilia setting, children are active participants in the setting, and the curriculum is guided by the child and their own interests and just supported by the adults. So the children and the adults work at the same level as if they were all colleagues together rather than adults looking after children. That's a really effective way to support the voice of the child and to hear it and to enable it. If you're working alongside rather than using what we used to call the top-down approach, where you're the adult, you know everything, the child knows nothing, and you're going to impart your wisdom to them and you know best. We know in reality, sometimes adults do know best because, you know, sometimes certain things have to be done. Children don't have the experience behind them to understand why we might be saying certain things, but we can still enable children to be active participants in the setting. We'll have a look at that in a minute, and we'll get your feedback as well so that we can get some ideas going backwards and forwards about how we're actually doing this in practical terms. So the curiosity approach is the focus here is on this enabling environment, which supports a child-led curriculum. Practitioners observe more and interrupt less. If you've come to any of my other webinars, you'll know that's something I'm really keen on, that we don't keep interrupting children all the time. There's a very good reason for that. And as you will see that all of my webinars have very similar themes, and that's because this is proven to support development, these sort of approaches. So allowing children to speak through things like creativity, curiosity, and exploration. They are telling us so much when we're just observing, when we're not directly involved, when we're not stopping them and asking questions like, how many teddy bears can you fit on the top there? Or can you sort the teddy bears out into colours? Why do we need to have this need to take over when actually this child is doing a really great job all by themselves? And we can observe and get so much more information. So even though that child might not be talking to us, the voice of the child is coming through because we're able to observe what he's doing, what he enjoys doing, where his strengths are, where he might need some support. That's the voice of the child coming through in that, just in that one picture. And then we have Montessori as well. So Montessori respects children as strong, independent learners who are intrinsically motivated. And actually, the EYFS says this as well, doesn't it? And Julian Grenier, who wrote the EYFS, says this, that children are hardwired. They are intrinsically motivated to learn. Without adults having to even really do anything, they will learn. But we obviously support and curate and scaffold and model to help them to learn. In Montessori, children are choosing their own activities and they work at their own pace. I think this is really key, a lot of this, working at your own pace, because in early years, especially in the past, there's been a sort of quite a rigid schedule that some settings stick to. And although children can benefit by having a routine that's too strict, where children have to stop and start and do things when the adult tells them, never allows them to actually get to the end of their exploration and their learning that's self-guided. So we're always sort of stopping them before they've actually got to the point where they've learned from that process that they're engaged in. And then some of you may have heard of this, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's Te Wariki, which is the New Zealand early years curriculum, very much based on the Indigenous people's ethos of supporting children's development. And here the learning emerges from the children's interests with an emphasis on the child's perspective. So again, the child's voice is embedded into the curriculum. It's really interesting if you want to look up Te Wariki. It's a really interesting sort of curriculum. I'm racing through this tonight. I'm sorry. Hopefully you'll have lots of things to say because we'll be finished quite soon if not. So let's have a look at hearing the voice of the child in practice. One of the things we can do is plan invitations and experiences to suit the individual child based on your knowledge of them. Now, we might have called that in the past the observation and planning cycle, mightn't we? Nowadays, we're not really writing all of that down as we did in the past, but we still have, especially if you're in a small setting where you know the children really well, really intimate knowledge of the child, what they like, what they might need to be learning, or what you can do to support them to move on to that next step. And by your observations of the child, you are gathering in the voice of the child, because you know a child that's gone on to do this activity, for example, they've chosen that activity themselves. You can see that they're in some type of, maybe they're in some type of construction schema going on there. You know, that's what that child really is into at that moment. How can I support them going forward? It's really easy, isn't it? You give them time, you give them the resources, and then you just let it happen. You know, that child might ask for support or help at some point, and that's great if they do, but actually that child looks like they're very busy and fully engaged themselves. So just using our knowledge of that child, so the voice of the child, we've heard the voice of the child in our observation of that child. And as I say, that we might have, if this was a real child in our real settings, we might have already based these resources on the voice of the child before, because we'd seen them doing something similar, and then we'd introduce these resources because we knew that would be the thing that would interest that child and engage their development. Oh, sorry, I must have put my thing in around the wrong way. We can offer real but manageable choices. Now, I know when we talked about enabling agency in children, we had quite a lively discussion about, well, if I give my child a choice, they might choose something that's not suitable. So, for example, they might choose to wear sandals in the snow. And that's true, they might. Now, there are two ways of looking at this. You can say, okay, it's really cold outside. If you put sandals on, your feet might get cold, but you can try it, because chances are they're going to go out and come back in after a couple of minutes and say they want to put some boots on instead. So sometimes it's helpful for a child to learn that themselves. They're not going to come to any harm just from getting cold toes, are they? But also, offering choice doesn't mean offering every single imaginable choice. Do you want to wear sandals? Do you want to wear shoes from the dressing up box? Do you want to wear lace ups? Do you want to wear shoes with Velcro? Or do you want your welly boots? You can curate the choices. So the child is still having choice. Their voice is still being heard, but it's manageable. So that's one other way around it. That really depends on you, your setting, the resources you've got, the time you've got. If you're just going out of the door to school, you might not have time for lots of different choices, but you might have time for two. So I would say, wherever possible, offer the children choice. You have a choice. You could choose this or this. Which would you prefer? Give children that choice and that agency and their voice, and then respect it. So if they choose to wear the wellies and it's a hot day, that's fine. Wear the wellies. It's fine. Or they're wearing wellies with a fairy dress. That's fine. It doesn't matter, does it? Because it's their choice, their voice, their decision. We can consider non-verbal communication. For example, how do we know when a child is really engaged and interested, or upset, or worried, or anxious, or tired? Now, I feel a little bit like I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, if you excuse that phrase here, because we all work in early years. We all know these things. But have you ever considered that you knowing those things is because you have heard and enabled the voice of the child? All children have those little cues, especially when they're very little, don't they? They might rub their ears when they're tired. They might have particular physical cues for when they feel upset or worried or they're anxious. We know those cues because we know the children so well. That is also hearing the voice of the child. So, for example, if you had an Ofsted inspection and the Ofsted inspector mentioned something like that, you can say, well, that child communicates. They're not verbal yet. They might be making noises, but they're not verbal yet. But I know what that child is trying to tell me, because I know he gets really excited when we see the cat. So I know he likes cats. Or I know when he starts snuggling in, I know he's tired and he's ready for his nap. That's his cue. That's his communication method with you at that time. And you're hearing the voice of the child.
Sorry, Kim.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Samia.
Yeah. Hi, Kim. Yeah. Just to, I will raise a question here. Sometime, like you said, we hear the voice of the child, and sometimes, like babies, a year-old baby, when they cry, and we know when they are being fed, they have been nappy changed, and they were playing, and we know that it's time for a rest nap. So we put them on sleep, but when parent come and they say, oh no, now they will wake up at home and they're gonna make us so busy and they shouldn't be sleeping this time. So how to, it's a bit of, because we know the child, they're tired, they want to sleep, and on the same time parent doesn't want us to put them sleep that time,
This is
but the child was crying for sleep.
This is a really good question, Samia. So my answer to the parents would be, because sometimes you have to be the advocate for the child. We might feel sorry for the parents that they're staying up later at night, but we have to put the child's interest first. So that has to come first. You might, some people have a policy which might particularly state that they will not stop it. Well, you can't stop a child from napping, that they just fall asleep, but also that they won't wake a child up, because a child that's tired needs a sleep. You can't keep a child awake. That would be cruel. And you can't really, it wouldn't be, I don't personally feel it would be right to wake them up. In some places around Europe in particular, earlier settings aren't allowed to wake a sleeping child. So, that we don't have that over here, but actually we do still have to be the advocate for the child. So you're quite right there, Samia. You've heard the voice of the child. The child is saying, I am tired. I've had a busy morning. I've had my lunch and now I'm ready to have a sleep. And that's what they need to do, and you're the advocate for the child. You've heard the voice of the child. So the way to approach that, I think, with parents, although maybe we'll ask that in the chat as well when we get to the chat part, the way to approach that with parents is just to explain that you cannot stop that. The child is tired and it would be cruel to keep them awake, and that you have to put the child's interest first. And sorry that means you're going to have a late evening, but it won't be forever. And that's what I always say to my parents, a few months down the line it will have changed again. So we can all empathize with parents and lack of sleep. We can all empathize with that, but we have to make sure we put the child's interests first. Does that make sense, Samia? Is that sort of what you were getting at?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Kim. I just wanted to
Yeah,
know that I'm doing the right thing.
I
And,
think you are.
yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
that's
Thank you
okay.
so
No
much for explaining.
Oh, no problem. And I tell you what, Samir, when we get to the end and we do the chat, let's open it up and see how other people manage that, because I think that would be interesting to find out, wouldn't it? Because I know some people
Yeah,
will wake children up. Obviously, if I don't know, some settings, if you've got to go on the school run or something, then you might, you can't just leave a child asleep if you've got to go out. But
yeah,
generally speaking, I wouldn't. I might make the room slightly noisier or open all the curtains or something like that, so the child can wake up naturally if we've got to go out to school or something like that. But we'll cover it again when we get to the end. It's a really good question. Thank you for that, Samia.
thank you.
That's okay. Remind me if I forget when we get to the end. Okay, so let's think about our
Okay.
continuous provision and accessible resources. So we were, when we looked at the principles of the EYFS, one of those is the enabling environment, isn't it? So an environment that makes children curious and engaged, and they can access things themselves. We have to be practical here. Unless you're living in a massive house or have a huge setting, you probably can't have everything out at the same time. That would just be chaotic, wouldn't it? But once again, we hear the voice of the child, and we use the voice of the child to curate our continuous provision and our resources, because you're going to move those resources around, aren't you? And refresh them depending on maybe on the season or on the child's interests. And as if you've got lots of very young children, the resources would be different to if you had lots of 3 and 4 year olds, wouldn't they? So we're hearing the voice of the child telling us what they're interested in, what their developmental stage is, and we curate our environment for the children around that. So this is just a generic picture I found online, but it just sort of gives you an example of accessible resources, things that children can access themselves without the adult having to get it for them, because that's a really important part of a child having agency and control over their own creativity. Excuse me. So when we're thinking about continuous provision, for anyone who's not sure what that is, that's the resources that are available all of the time or most of the time. So I always like to think when I'm talking to settings, when I'm supporting them, that you make sure you're covering each area of learning and development. in your continuous provision. So you've got some role play materials, you've got some malleable materials, you've got some mark making going on somewhere, you've got some construction going on somewhere, and they should all be things that are available all the time. Not huge amounts necessarily, because of the size restrictions most of us have, especially if we're working from our homes. But having a small area which is a mark making area, and then having a table that's got malleable materials on it, doesn't mean you're always going to have clay and Play-Doh and gloop out. You might just choose one of those things, but having that continuous provision with accessible resources that children can select themselves and choose what to do with themselves is key to hearing the voice of the child. And actually observing the children using these resources in this provision would also feed back into that voice of the child, our knowledge of the child. What did they choose? Were they really particularly engaged in those small stones on the bottom shelf? What did they do with them? Did they post them into something else? Did they empty out these baskets and fill them up with something else and use it for some sort of role play game? These tell you how to keep curating your environment to fit the child's individual needs. We've talked about slow pedagogy before, haven't we, in our webinars? So this is also key to hearing the child's voice, because a slow pedagogy, for those who aren't aware, it's where basically it does what it says on the tin. We slow down. We don't rush from one activity to the next. We take it easy. We don't feel that we have to push children through tick box type activities to make sure they're meeting areas of learning and development. What we do instead is give them a chance to have childhood that's relaxed, because it offers so many huge benefits. So a slow pedagogy gives you time to listen, time to look at what the child wants to show you. If you're out in the garden and they want to look at a dandelion, take the time to sit and look at that dandelion or that snail. Or so last week I was out with my childminding children, and we went to a park where they had one of those big round swings, really big, and we all laid on that swing looking up at the clouds. I mean, we must have been on there for nearly an hour, talking about the clouds, talking about the birds. We were swinging ourselves as well, and then we pretended we were on a ship, and that led into some storytelling. There was no rush. It didn't matter that we didn't go on anything else. We were just taking our time, and it was a really enriched moment with the children. Lots and lots of amazing communication. And one of the children started telling me about she'd had a bad dream. And because we were just laying there quietly looking up at the sky, she felt able to talk about these things, and we could listen, and then afterwards discuss it and say how sad it is when you have a bad dream, and talk through her worries and anxieties. So that's the sort of thing we mean by that slow pedagogy. Slow it down. Don't rush. It's fine. There's no rush to grow up. There's no race to get to the end point. Hopefully, and it's time we all took that on board, for us as well, actually. So yeah, time to listen, time to look at what the child wants to show you, and time to talk with the child. Quite often, and I have done a webinar about this before, people ask me, am I doing enough? And you see that quite often if you're on social media groups for new childminders or new early years practitioners. Am I doing enough? Should I be doing more with the children? Actually, you're probably doing a little bit less, because if you've got your enabling environment and you've got your positive relationship, and you're aware of that unique child's needs and interests, you're doing it already, aren't you? So that's what we mean by a slow pedagogy. And wherever possible, involve children in decision making. As we said with the choice making earlier, we can curate that a little bit, can't we? This is three of my children at the local co-op, and we'd obviously, I don't know what we'd gone to buy, but we've got some bananas in that basket. Maybe we were cooking. Looked like we're looking at the cooking ingredients, baking ingredients. Think about it. Is it really important that I make the choice of what we're going to cook? No, it's really not. It makes no difference to me whether we make cakes or pancakes or banana bread, or pizza. It doesn't matter, because the whole point really is that we're all engaged in something together. So we were obviously there looking at something and trying to decide what we were going to buy. And they've all got their own baskets so they can choose something. And I'm sure most childminders like myself, you have to at some point during the week go to the shop and buy some more fruit, don't you? Or you've got to buy some bread or something. Involve children in those decision making activities. You don't have to plan it particularly, just go with it. And I don't necessarily mean just with this type of activity. For example, let's think about setting the table. Where would they like to sit? Could they set the table? Which colour cup do they want to choose? You know, if you have an enabling environment in the home or in your setting, then children are able to choose those things by themselves, aren't they? Where would you like to sit? Which cup are you going to use? Which plate are you going to use? You choose all those things yourself. And you can also, I know we've talked about it before, do self-service with food. So if you are providing food for children, for example, let's imagine you're making a pasta bake. Instead of dishing it up onto the children's plates, put it in the middle of the table with a spoon and they serve themselves. This makes a huge difference to the amount of food and the types of food that children will eat. And it also makes mealtimes really sociable. Now, this is no disrespect to anyone who doesn't provide food. I know we all do this for different reasons. Some of us provide food, some of us don't. But think of other ways you can enable those decision making. Maybe on the walk to school, there are 2 routes. Why not let the children choose which route they're going to take? It's something as simple as that. Or you've got a day with nothing particular planned. Why not choose what you're going to do that day? Let the children choose. I go to one setting, which is a preschool in my assessing job. And they, at the lunch table, each child puts their name tag into a little, I think it's a Pringles tin actually, that's got a picture on the outside. And it's to choose what activity they'd like to do that afternoon. I always have a group activity. It can be something like singing or dancing, something along those lines. And then, or exercise or whatever they're going to do, like yoga or something like that. And the children vote using their little name tags. And then they open it up after lunch and see who's got the most votes. And then that's the thing they do that afternoon. And it's a really good way to involve children in that decision making, give them a bit of agency and hear their voice. So however you want to do that decision making, instead of always making the decisions yourselves, hand it over to the children and think, you know, it's okay. What does it matter? The most important thing is that the children are engaged and involved. And it doesn't matter actually which thing you cook or which fruit you buy, for example. Okay, we have also talked about this before, haven't we? Embrace process over product, because art and creativity says a lot about the voice of the child. When the child is fully engaged in creative activities that are process over product, so that means there's no expected product at the end. This is when you can really see children's interests, their engagement, their likes, their dislikes. You can see that all come together, and it makes some amazing observations. And again, it's something that we can do very easily by just letting go and letting children take over the process and enjoy the process without us expecting a product at the end. Because when we're expecting a product at the end, what we're doing is we're taking away the voice of the child. We're saying, I don't want you to do this thing. I want you to do something else instead. We wouldn't like that as an adult, would we? And children don't particularly like it either, but children are usually quite compliant like that. But actually, what we need to do is embrace process over product. So if anyone that comes to any of our network groups will know that that's something we advocate for there all the time. That's really important, that we can we don't have any expectation of an end product in any of our network groups. Now, hopefully that's given you a few ideas of how you could do things to enable hearing the voice of the child. But if you've got your phone to hand and can scan in this QR code, you can let me know how you are hearing the voice of the child in your setting. So how are you enabling them to take part in decision making, or choices, all that type of thing? How are you doing that? If you can't do that for some reason, your phone's not working or you haven't got your phone, just pop it in the chat. I can see that a couple of people are typing. I'm just going to have a sip of my tea. I haven't gone. I'd also like to ask, if you aren't sure about enabling the voice of the child and hearing the voice of the child, is there something you think you could change or do differently in your setting? Yeah, listening and observing, exactly. Yeah, being as that sort of phrase goes, in the moment, being there in the moment with the child. It is hard. I completely understand. Sometimes we're really busy, aren't we, with practical things? But if we can just focus on the child just for a few moments during the day, it makes a big difference. Sharing ideas, yeah, lovely. Open-ended activities, lovely. Free play, yeah. So free play is sort of a phrase that I find difficult, and that's because I don't believe there is non-free play, because adult-led play, in my opinion, is not play, it's adult-led activity. Play is always free, so that's amazing. Yeah, but I know what you mean. It means, there's no expectation. Children can just do whatever they want in the setting. Yeah, being present in the moment, exactly. Open-ended activities, yes. Open-ended, loose parts, all of those things that we talk about all the time. Having this amazing sort of enabling environment really helps to support the voice of the child. Giving them a choice, yeah, exactly. Would anyone like to be more specific about how you're doing things like giving children a choice or sharing ideas, or what we mean by resources, for example? Sharing ideas, add resources week, play, children. Someone might need to explain to me what they'd actually put there, because it's broken it up a little bit. Following the children's ideas. Yes, excellent idea.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
by open-ended activities, what we often do is, so we might set up an activity with an idea in mind. So say we've got flour and glitter in a tray with some paintbrushes. So we're thinking mark making, but they might take it in a completely different route. So we kind of let them then lead it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Well done. Thank you for that. Exactly. Yeah, it's just that not having this feeling that we adults have to say, no, you can't do it like that. It has to be like this, because we have to go with what the child needs to do, because that's where we are hearing their voice. And also that's where we know the best learning comes from, doesn't it? Thank you for that.
Yeah, we also often of an evening when we've got as we're kind of setting up for the next day, the
Yeah.
children that are still in, obviously we plan them according to children that aren't in and set things out, but we might let them, if they are in the next day, kind of choose an activity to put out to share with their friends.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yes, if you're setting up, yeah, that's a good idea.
So they
It
kind of
really is.
helps their setup. They kind of go, okay, well, actually, we think Princess would be really cool. We haven't had them out for a while. And that,
Yeah.
okay, so that's what you really enjoy. We can then share that with your friends.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good idea. Yeah, definitely a good idea. Thank you for that. What have we got? Choosing storybooks and rhymes. Yeah, I guess you mean by this the children choose, and that's, yes, exactly. So, because what does it matter which book you read? It's much more important that the children are engaged in reading, isn't it? So yes, let the children choose the books. That's amazing. And if you go to the library, obviously let the children choose the books at the library. And rhymes, yeah, there are lots of different ways to do this, but I think some of you might still have been in early years as long as me, when Essex County Council gave out the rhyme bags with the little song prompts in. I've still got mine, and I run the rhyme time at the local library near me with my childminding children. We take our song bag along and we pass it around. So even very, very young babies have a choice. That's what we're saying, really, when we're hearing the voice. What is that child's choice? What is their decision? What is their view? that baby's view is that they want to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. They can't say Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. They can't tell me in any other way apart from looking in that bag and finding the star. So those sort of things are really easy to enable, aren't they? What have we got? Choosing where to play, inside or outside. Yeah, lovely. Yes, of course. And if you've got free flow, I know that's not always possible, is it? But free flow really enables that, doesn't it? Listening to children as they talk about their drawings. That's a really good one because without being disrespectful to children, it's not always obvious, is it, what their pictures are. And actually that can open up a whole conversation about something else that they've been thinking about, can't it? Because quite often that comes out in their creativity, doesn't it? Something that worried them, something they've remembered. One of my grandchildren drew a picture of our cat that had died last year and gave it to me and said she was sad about the cat, and that was a year ago. Okay, we've got a new cat since then and we'd all sort of moved on, but she was obviously thinking about it and wanting to talk about it, and so that's a really good idea, listening to the children with anything like that. If they're coming to show you anything at all, take a moment to just let them show it to you. Let's have a look. All the words keep moving around.
Kim, sorry, Kim.
Yeah,
I was just going to interrupt. There's a few things coming on the chat as well.
Oh, okay.
Louise has put, give a child the role of being the helper. Isabel has put garden area. They can choose water play, foam, bubbles, bikes, use their ideas in the moment. Louise has put a song basket so they can choose a song. And then Samantha Grant has put observing the child having a choice in activities, songs, rhymes, activities, snacks, providing resources to enhance and extend their learning. So loads of good points in there.
Yeah, all good points. Thank you, Damon. Thank you. As I say, I can't see the chat when I'm sharing the slides, so that's really helpful to know. Yes, definitely. I mean, I think we're all sort of going along the same lines here, aren't we? That we need to make sure that children have choice, because it's in choice that we hear their voice. And earlier on, we were saying about safeguarding, weren't we? And I know it might be that, well, how do those two things connect? The voice of the child having a choice of where to play and safeguarding. But a child that knows that their views are being taken seriously is much more likely to come to you with something that's a real concern and know that you will listen to them, because you listened to them when they showed you that picture, and you listened to them when they wanted to show you a snail they'd found in the garden. So you are taking them seriously and you are respecting their views. When they said they were scared to go into the dark tent, you understood and respected it. And so now they feel comfortable to come to you to tell you that something's really worrying them. So that's where we get safeguarding, because I think, as we've spoken about before, sadly, 1 in 6 men and 1 in 4 women have suffered abuse as a child. And on average, a child has to tell an adult 7 times, and not necessarily the same adult, before anything happens. So that's quite appalling when you think about it, because a child has to summon up the courage to say that something's going on 7 times and be ignored 6 times until the 7th person does something. And also, because we're listening to the voice of the child, whether it's verbal or not verbal, that might mean that we can safeguard a very young child who can't communicate verbally with us, but we understand that something's going on with them because of their behaviour. So that's how we're tying in safeguarding with this. So I'm just going to carry on reading some of your lovely ideas. So I can see something at the bottom, but it says, oh, hold on, my thing was in the way. For send, objects of reference and speech buttons. Yes, objects of reference. For anyone who's not sure what that means, it means having an actual thing to show them, doesn't it? Like, this is your cup, this is your I don't know, a nappy, this is your hat, whatever it is, so that the real things. Would you like a drink in this cup? So the child can go and choose the thing and show you what it is they want. That's a really, really good idea. Speech buttons, I guess you mean those little recording things, don't you? Again, a really, really good idea. Open-ended activities, yeah. Freedom of expression, definitely, because we all want that, don't we? And whether that's artistic freedom of expression, like process over product, or whether it's a child that wants to just sing and dance, great, go with it. Give them that freedom of expression, because that's how children learn to have confidence in their own views and know that they are listened to and taken seriously. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant ideas there. Really lovely. Oh, rolling snack. Yes. Now, rolling snack is similar to when we're talking about self-serve, isn't it? Rather than the adult deciding what the child is going to eat and giving them the thing, it's giving them the choice. We wouldn't want to go into a restaurant and someone else decides what we're going to have to eat. We want to go and choose it ourselves, don't we? And that's a really important aspect of hearing the voice of the child and enabling that choice and freedom. Just seeing if I've missed anything, giving them a choice. Makaton. Yes, Makaton's really useful, actually, isn't it? Because it gives children a tool to communicate, even when it might not be well, obviously you're using a word, you're using the verbal word as well as the sign with Makaton, but it does support development and learning development, and it does give them an extra communication tool. So that's a really good point, actually.
We've recently started using Makaton, and we've got 2 non-verbal children.
Yeah.
But one of them's preschooler, but he now will communicate no through Makaton. And from that, he's now verbalizing it as well. So it started off with the sign, and now he'll verbalize it as well. So it's opened up the communication for him more.
That's excellent. That's a really good example of that. Thank you for that. Yes, because Makaton, when you're making the sign physically with your hands and saying the word at the same time, it makes the neurons in the brain connect up, doesn't it, to just for communication. It sort of makes those neurons go bing, 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 and all these words start forming. That's a really brilliant example. Actually, when you're saying that child says no, that made me think one of the things we need to do when we're hearing the voice of the child is also and taking it seriously, so the child's views need to be taken seriously, is teach other children that everyone's views need to be taken seriously. So when a child says no, it means no. I don't want to be cuddled, or I don't want to be hold hands, or whatever it is that they don't want to do with their friends. If they say no, we should respect that. I've got a little one at the moment who sort of keeps trying to kiss one of the other children, and sometimes the other child wants to, and sometimes the other, just on the cheek, and sometimes they just don't want to. She's very kissy cuddly at the moment. And so we've been saying, that's lovely that you want to kiss your friend or cuddle your friend, but maybe you need to ask them first. So let's ask, would you like a cuddle? If the friend says yes, great, have a cuddle. If the friend says no, then we have to respect it. And that's all part of respecting that bodily autonomy, which is also part of the voice of the child and eventually the voice of the adult, isn't it? So thank you for saying that. You made that pop into my head, otherwise I'd have forgotten.
Sorry. One of the other things, we've made sure that we teach Makaton to the entire setting, so it doesn't feel like so it's an inclusive practice across everybody, so that even when the non-verbal children use it but they're not verbalizing, the other children have an understanding. Because I've heard of in some other settings where they've only used it with children with SEND,
right,
which obviously then doesn't show inclusivity. The friends don't then understand what they're signing, so to use it as a full setting practice makes a big difference for them as well.
I totally agree. I think you're completely right, because also Makaton is very useful for everybody, and it's not just something for children with SEND. It's something that supports all types of learning and communication, doesn't it? So why wouldn't you have it as an inclusive thing throughout the setting? That would just seem to me like an obvious thing, wouldn't it? And a little bit sad, actually, that some settings would only use it with SEND children, because it does single them out.
I think that happens more in primary schools from what I've come across. My daughter is autistic, so I've been using it with her because she has emotional regulation issues.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes she can't physically get the words out. So I started using it with her, and I found it's made a big difference for her at home. But at school, it's not an inclusive practice. So when she's trying to use it, they don't understand. So I've had to kind of say, oh, this is what we've been doing.
Oh, gosh. I mean, it's great that you can say that to them, but it's a little bit sad, actually, isn't it? Because you think Makaton would be something that everyone was aware of, at least in a basic way, especially in the early years. You'd think that would be something that most early years teachers and staff would be aware of, some of the very basic things.
I
But
think I've now turned her year one teacher onto Mr. Tumble.
I mean, everyone likes Mr. Tumble. That's the easiest way to learn it, isn't it? If you can
It's a very
at
good
least
way to learn it.
Yeah, some of the very simple ones. Thank you for that. That's really, really interesting. Okay, let's see. Oh, yes. So we're talking about safeguarding. Obviously, I just covered that. But when a child knows they're listened to and they're understood and taken seriously, you've created that culture of openness, which is mentioned in the EYFS in section 3, that we need to create a culture of openness where a child feels safe to tell you something, whether it's verbal or not. So that's how we have to think of the voice of the child, isn't it? So,
Kim,
yes. Yeah, carry on.
yeah, Kim, sorry. Yeah. I would like to add a point here when you said about safeguarding and hearing the voice of the child through play. I recently found a child. I actually evidenced that, and that was very, very, very different experience for me to evidence that a child through play showed me that the child being abused somewhere, like through play to different dolls and stuff. And
Okay.
I did reported that, and then yes, then that really helped me to understand that not only it helps the child in many different ways. Like you said, in safeguarding, we can evidence that something is going wrong, because through play, when we let them play and choose it, they choose and they show from their behavior that what's going on in their life, different situations.
That's an excellent observation of your experience, Sumia. Thank you. I mean, obviously very sad for that child, but you're exactly right. That child doesn't have to come to you and say, this thing is happening. You might observe it through something like play or behavior in general. They might be withdrawn, they might be angry themselves, mightn't they, or they might just be acting out of character. So yeah, that's a very good example. You're quite right. And if you've seen something like that, then that is an immediate safeguarding red flag, isn't it? So well done for noticing, and well done for reporting it. That was the correct thing to do, wasn't it? So when we think of the summary, just to summarise, and then we'll go on to the chat, and then we can have a chat about, especially about the sleep thing, because I think that was quite an interesting point, wasn't it? So what do we miss when we don't hear the voice of the child? We miss the opportunity to work with the child's interests, which we know is key to supporting learning and development, and the opportunity to support them through any anxieties or worries they might be having. That example of us on the swing, that child might not have come to me and told me about her bad dream. And the bad dream was just about something that had happened at home, not anything awful, but something she was worried about. And I might not have known about that unless I'd listened to the voice of the child, in that case verbal, but because the environment was right for it. When we don't hear the voice of the child, what message are we sending to them? Your views don't matter, and that adults can override your opinions. And that's really something in early years that we are moving away from, aren't we? We're all moving away from this, as we call it, the top-down approach of the adult knows everything, the child knows nothing, and we have to impart things to them and tell them what to do. Instead, we're much more heading towards, I hope, the Reggio Emilia approach, where we're working with children as if they are our colleagues, and that we're all on the same level. We might be older than them. Yes, we might have more experience than them in some areas. And yes, they need some support, but they are still humans with their own views and their own opinions, which should be taken seriously. So that's the importance of the voice of the child. I'll go on to the chat in a second, just so you know, our next webinar, but we haven't sorted out the date yet, is working in partnership. So this is how effective partnership with parents and carers supports children's development. And As always, bespoke support is available for anyone that would like it. You get 6 sessions, usually over a half term, that are focused particularly on your setting and any areas you've identified where you need some support in those areas. Mostly online, but can be face to face sometimes as well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing